Coming up, Hezbollah's worldwide operations.
Hezbollah is an extremely capable terrorist organization, and it is today, increasingly, an international organized criminal syndicate as well.
Washington Institute's Matthew Levitt discusses Hezbollah's relationship with Iran and its footprint in Europe, New York, and beyond. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
Matt Levitt is our speaker, and I'm delighted to have him back at this podium, as his previous discussions on Hamas and finance and national security held our audience in rapt attention. I expect that to happen once again. His latest work, entitled Hezbollah, the Global Footprint of Lebanon's Party of God, provides a fascinating assessment of Hezbollah's worldwide operations. It is the first study of its kind to focus specifically on Hezbollah's clandestine and illicit activities.
There's plenty to talk about regarding Hezbollah's global activities. The fact that the European Union recently designated Hezbollah's terrorist and military wings, not the whole of the organization, but the military and terrorist wings as an international terrorist organization, not quite what we here in the United States have done, what the Canadians, Israelis, or the Dutch have done, but still an important step. And it shouldn't surprise that this happened, because Hezbollah is now more active in international terrorism than it has been for years. And it's kind of interesting, because Hezbollah's decision to roll back its actual terrorist operations, bombs and bullets, in favor of focusing on logistics, procuring arms for its militants in southern Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley, raising funds through criminal and other enterprises, all kinds of logistical activities. The reason they decided to focus on that was because of a massive terrorist incident that had nothing to do with them, which was 9/11. Hezbollah made a conscious decision that it was not going to be caught in the crosshairs of this war on terrorism. And they did not want to be portrayed as being the same thing as al-Qaeda. And yet, now, several years on, they are back in this business like never before. We all know about the attack in Burgas, Bulgaria, which killed 6 individuals, 5 Israeli tourists and a Bulgarian bus driver whose last-minute activities probably saved lives by moving the bus, and wounded many more. You're probably also aware that just a week and a half earlier, an almost identical plot targeting Israeli tourists as they got off their airplane onto tourist bus was thwarted in Cyprus. What you may not be aware is that that individual, Hussam Yaqub, is a dual citizen, a Lebanese-Swedish citizen, a European Union citizen. In fact, you may not be aware that he was the second European, in fact, the second Swedish Hezbollah operative to be arrested in 6 months. The other, Hussein Atris, is now on trial in Thailand. Other Hezbollah operatives are now on trial in Nigeria. And other operations didn't lead to people being captured and jailed and put on trial, but were thwarted in Turkey. There was surveillance of Jews at the airport in Johannesburg. And in case it's unclear to you what Hezbollah's international terrorism is all about, let me make it clear. There are 2 distinct Hezbollah operational trends going on today as we speak. The one harks back to February 2008, the assassination in Damascus of Imad Mughniya, who until his death was the head of Hezbollah's Islamic Jihad organization, the terrorist wing, the long arm of Hezbollah. After his assassination, Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, spoke at his funeral by video teleconference. He didn't come in person for fear that he might be the next victim, and said, "We believe that Israel carried out this assassination. Israel, if you want, as he put it, open war, let it be open war." And the Israelis didn't have to wait very long before a plot was thwarted in Baku, Azerbaijan, targeting the Israeli ambassador. There was a side piece relating to a radar station. They were conducting surveillance at the embassy, which was not a standalone embassy, but rather was a tall office building, which also housed 2 other embassies, which didn't seem to bother them not one bit. A series of plots unfolded over the next several months, each and every one of them either foiled or failed. Some were proactively foiled by counterterrorism agencies. Some, we got lucky, and they just failed. And things came to a head in 2009. And Hezbollah, having failed several times, reached out to Iran. Iran created Hezbollah in the early 1980s, pulling together a variety of Lebanese Shia militant groups under the umbrella of Hezbollah, the Party of God. And here Hezbollah went to Iran and said, Mughniya was important to you too. In fact, we believe that by the time he was assassinated, Mughniya was double-hatted. He was the head of the Islamic Jihad organization and was also a commissioned officer in the Quds Force. And they said to Iran, you need to give us more logistical support to carry out an attack to avenge Mugnia's death. And let me be clear, the attacks they were looking at were all focused on current or former senior Israeli officials. This had to be a person of stature to be equal to the prince of Hezbollah, to Imad Mugnia. And for this operation in Turkey, as it happened, they did get much more logistical support than usual. And yet this one also, targeting an Israeli consul general in Istanbul, was foiled. And now you have a very, very rare occurrence where Hezbollah and Iran, which the US intelligence community now describe as being in a strategic partnership, intimately cooperating together, are yelling at each other, quite angry. Hezbollah is saying to Iran, if you really cared, you'd provide us the support we really need to get this done. It was Mugnia, after all. And Iran is saying, you know what, you guys used to be really, really good. And as they're fighting in the end of 2009, the whole debate is put to rest, not because they come to an agreement, but because of a completely separate event in January 2010. The assassination with a sticky bomb, a magnetic bomb that was put onto a car vehicle at rush hour in Tehran, the assassination of a key professor and nuclear scientist, Professor Mohammadi, in Tehran. At this point, the Iranians are apoplectic. It's not just that they're losing key people in their nuclear program. It's the optics that they're unable to protect key people on their own home turf. And they call in the Quds Force, and they call in Hezbollah, and they make it clear that the fighting is over. And here's how it will be. You, Quds Force, you will target Western diplomats. And every so often, targets that are representative of Israel or maybe the Jewish community. And so there have been a whole variety of plots, you've probably heard of some, targeting mostly Israeli, but also Saudi, British, and American diplomats around the world. In terms of attacks on Americans, the one that was the scariest was when they came very close and we watched them doing some very serious targeting and surveillance of US diplomats, again in Baku, Azerbaijan. And in that case, it wasn't just the ambassador, it wasn't just other diplomats, it was their families as well. For this, they put together a dedicated unit within the Quds Force, Unit 400. Unit 400, by the way, has still not had a success. The closest they had is when they put a sticky bomb, attached a sticky bomb to the car of the wife of the Israeli defense attaché in India. She was wounded, she's okay, but it appears that they weren't actually targeting her. They gave up because the Israeli countermeasures were too good, and they eventually said, forget it, whatever the next car is that comes out of the embassy. It could have been a journalist, could have been anybody. You, Hezbollah, said Iran, you're going to target Israeli tourists, soft targets. And before you do, you're going to take a break because you've got to get your act together. And you will recruit the creme de la creme from the Islamic resistance militia. And you will teach them the dark arts, and if you need, we will help teach them the dark arts. You've lost Mugnia as the quarterback for your terrorist operations. His brother-in-law, Mustafa Badruddin, is now in his place. Mugnia was a much more capable person. Badruddin is reportedly a lot less stable. And you need to train these people up, and that's what they did. And then when they were ready, they went and they carried out Burgas. They went and they tried to carry out Cyprus and a whole bunch of other operations. That much we knew for some time. And then only when the public court documents came out of the Cyprus case did we learn that Hezbollah was plotting these types of operations even before Mugnia was killed in 2008. And certainly before the shadow war between Iran and the West really started picking up pace in 2008, 2009, and 2010. The fact of the matter is that between their efforts to avenge Mugnia's death on the one hand and to play their role in Iran's shadow war with the West on the other, Hezbollah is very, very busy. Now, it's interesting. When all this was going on, but we didn't know about all of it in the open source yet, Nasrallah gave an interview to a Kuwaiti newspaper. At this point, we already knew that Hezbollah was trying to avenge the death of Mugnia. And the newspaper, the journalist, who's either very, very smart or very, very brave or very, very dumb or maybe a little bit of all, each says to Nasrallah, so Nasrallah, you don't really care about Mugnia, do you? Because you haven't avenged his death. And Nasrallah says, no, we care about him very much, thank you. Well, then you're not very good, are you? Because you haven't avenged his death. And Nasrallah says something which is a very healthy attitude on life. It's good for your blood pressure. Says, no, no, no. It's not a question of whether we're good or bad, capable or not. It's all a question of whether God wants it to be. We do our best, And our best will succeed if God wants it to succeed. And if not, we won't yet succeed. Very healthy perspective on life. And then he adds something unsolicited that at the time I and everybody else didn't pay any attention to, because we didn't yet know that Hezbollah was on a tear, surveilling and soon trying to assassinate Israeli tourists. He said, unsolicited, he said, by the way, let me be clear. If we wanted to hit some Israeli tourists here or there, we could do that anytime. That's not for Mugniya. For Mugniya, it's got to be someone serious. Now, I want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, but I also don't want to leave you with the misimpression that Hezbollah's activities are only in places that are far away. The number of times New York comes up in the investigation that ended up being this book really blew my mind. And there's a connection that comes back to all of this, including to Imad Mugniya. You're probably aware of the 1992 bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, the 1994 bombing, not 2 years later, of the Jewish Community Center, the Amia Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. What you may not be aware of is the New York City connection to the 1994 bombing. Iran and Hezbollah teamed up for those operations. Sometimes their communications back to Iranian or Hezbollah masters was pretty sophisticated, and sometimes not. Sometimes they simply picked up a payphone and made a direct call. Sometimes pretty sloppy. The Argentinian investigators were able to determine sometimes who made the call because they would a person would call his sister, and then he'd call his brother, and then he'd call Hezbollah headquarters, and then he'd call the other brother, and the sequence of phone calls makes it pretty clear that it was probably that particular individual. And in at least some instances, they used a cutout, not an actual switchboard, but someone sitting here in New York operating as a switchboard, routing calls that were made from South America to New York, and then routing those calls onward to Lebanon. There are many, many more examples, but at the same time in 1994, the FBI wrote a report talking about their concern about Hezbollah supporters here in New York and the counter-surveillance activities that they're doing and their security consciousness. But the one I want to leave you with is this, to bring it a little closer to today. Imad Mugniya was assassinated in February 2008 in Damascus. And as any professional intelligence organization, a government or otherwise would do after this happened, Hezbollah started doing after-action damage assessments to figure out where was the leak, where's the gap, and fill the gap. And they were looking into many, many different ways. And one of the ways, and I have to admit that as the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intelligence at the U.S. Treasury Department, I love this story. They were very concerned that we were following the money and followed it right back to them. And as it happens, there was a particular pot of money worth following. And it starts with an individual in Brooklyn, a low-level Hezbollah guy who was involved in small-scale criminal enterprises, stolen cell phones, stolen PlayStations, knockoff Nikes, this type of stuff, and blossomed into an effort to procure weapons and to sell massive amounts of counterfeit currency. Make a long story short, this individual meets someone who he thinks is a foot soldier for the Philadelphia Mafia. Unfortunately for him, because their relationship developed and blossomed, unfortunately for him, he was an FBI source. The individual develops a relationship, and eventually this person who had lived in Brooklyn says, I'll tell you what, forget the small-scale cell phones and PlayStations. Let's do real business. We could make some real money. My buddies, my family, who are higher up in Hezbollah than I am, they have access to massive, high-quality counterfeit that Hezbollah produces in the Bekaa Valley. We could be doing millions. Tell you what, why don't I see if my guys in Lebanon would be willing to have you come to Lebanon? And they'll kind of interview you. And if they like you, then we'll go ahead, we'll do some great business. And so this source of the FBI's goes to Lebanon, apparently impresses, because they say to him, I'll tell you what, we're now going to take you around Beirut, show you some of the tourist sites for a couple of days, and we'll take pictures of you touring around. We won't be in the pictures, of course, that wouldn't be good operational security. But you'll be in the pictures, and a couple of weeks after you get home, we'll send you a photo album of your touring of Lebanon. And the guy's thinking to himself, why would, and as he's thinking this, they said, and then when you get the album, rip off the front cover. And hidden in there, we will stick 2 samples of our best $100 bill counterfeit. So good, you will not be able to tell the difference. 2 weeks go by, he gets an album, lots of pictures of him touring around Lebanon, rips off the front cover, 2 brand new, crisp bills. Unfortunately for Hezbollah, this was a source, so he went to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which includes the Secret Service. Secret Service takes a look at these bills and comes back and says, I got good news and bad news, and it's one and the same. It's not counterfeit. And it gets worse. We've run the numbers, the serial numbers. These two bills are actual U.S. currency that came from a large batch of U.S. government funds delivered to Iraq as reconstruction. Your taxpayer dollars and my taxpayer dollars sent to reconstruct Iraq that somehow Hezbollah has stolen. They've got our attention now. So the instructions to the source are go back to your Hezbollah contact, pretending to be a foot soldier for the Philadelphia mob, and read him the riot act. Do you think we in the mob don't know counterfeit from not counterfeit? Bada bing, bada bang, and yelling and screaming. The color drains from the person's face, and he says, I'll tell you what. We've already arranged for my boss from Lebanon to come here to the United States and meet your boss, the mafia boss. We'll explain it all then. My feeling is that Hezbollah simply watches too many episodes of The Sopranos, and they were given what they wanted, which is a rented McMansion in Miami, where an undercover agent posing as a mafia boss wined and dined this Hezbollah person that we allowed in the country so that we could record all of the conversations. And it was an absolutely textbook, beautiful, almost out of the movies penetration of Hezbollah, sending people there, drawing their people here, and talking into microphones he didn't know existed. The guy says over and over, don't tell anybody, this is just between us, but talking about Hezbollah's access, for example, to Iranian satellites for use in targeting Israeli communities with those 60,000 rockets. Talking about the counterfeit machines that are running in the Bekaa Valley 18 hours a day and the various types of bills, whatever bill you want, they can make counterfeit. And explaining what happened. About that little to-do where we told you it was counterfeit and it really wasn't. Listen, we had a problem. Somebody assassinated Mugniya, whose nickname was the Fox, the man who never sleeps. 3 different times Western intelligence tried and failed to get Mugniya. Who got him now? And so one of their theories in their after-action damage assessment was maybe they followed the money. What money? He explains. We, Hezbollah, have had for years, he says, an operation ongoing throughout the world where our guys, whenever they have an opportunity to steal real money, send it to Iran, it sits, it cools off, and in time it's sent through Syria or Turkey back to Lebanon. And the purpose of this real money is for operations. When you're doing operations, you want good operational security. You don't want to use counterfeit. You don't want to bring additional law enforcement scrutiny to yourself. So for the real deal, for bullets and bombs, we use real cash, stolen but real cash. This was Mugniya's terrorist slush fund. And the source says, in case we're not so sharp, this is Hezbollah, terrorism, Hezbollah. This is not Hezbollah social welfare, and Hezbollah, by the way, does provide social welfare in Lebanon. This is not Hezbollah politics, and of course Hezbollah is a political party in Lebanon. Not Hezbollah militia activity or anything. Hezbollah, terrorism, Hezbollah. And they're afraid that we followed this money right to Nasrallah's back door. And so they're trying to get rid of it. It's good money. You can't just burn the money, right? But if they pass it off as counterfeit, maybe they can still make 40, 50, 60 cents on the dollar. An amazing story that most people are unaware of on Imad Mugniya's death that comes right back to Brooklyn, New York. On the one hand, Hezbollah is an extremely capable terrorist organization, and it is today, increasingly, an international organized criminal syndicate as well. But it is also not 10 feet tall. They carried out successfully the Burgas, Bulgaria bombing, it's true. But even in that case, they made all kinds of mistakes that investigators are putting together now. But in all the other cases, and there have been many, they have failed and failed and failed again. In the real world, outside of television and the movies, it's not the case that these guys are unstoppable. And yet it still is the case that they only have to succeed once, and we have to succeed every single day.
There seem to be 2 global wars going on which overlap to some extent. One is radical Islam against Israel and the West, and the other is Shia against Sunni. How would you summarize our position? Are we winning or losing the war on terror?
We are, I believe, a lot safer than we were on 9/11, 9/10, 11, or 12. And cards on the table, I was at the FBI on 9/11, and I led the analytical team for Flight 175 out of headquarters at the time. But the world is non-static. Our adversaries are non-static. This is an evolutionary issue. And it changes, and we need to change with it. The nature of the threat has changed. The nature of the threat from al-Qaeda, which was at one point very much related to the core, and is now related not only to the core with the head now of Ayman al-Zawahiri. He just issued a new statement reminding people of the need not only to carry out attacks everywhere else, but here in the homeland as well, but of the affiliate groups, and not only the formal affiliate groups, but those wannabe groups, for example, the ones that are developing now in the Sinai. Syria has the potential to be a brand new impetus of oxygen into both sides of the Sunni and Shia extremist environments. You need to remember that for Sunni extremists and for Muslims in general, good people, Syria is much more central to their history than Iraq ever was. We have potential now for real blowback. There are Americans who are in Syria fighting and not on the side of the good guys, by which I don't mean one side or the other. There are bad guys on all sides of this conflict. And there are many, many Europeans, and the Europeans are particularly concerned because these people are going to come home maybe with their passports and they have rights and they will come home, and what will they do? I don't think it's accurate to put it as one or the other. We have to deal with all of these threats at the same time. But one of the most interesting things to me is whether or not what's happening in Syria will lead to a division between the extremists, the radicals on the Sunni and Shia side, which will make it so that they won't work together as they sometimes have in the past. Don't get me wrong, they don't like each other. For many of the most radical Sunnis, they have a phrase that basically says the Shia are even worse than the Jews, even worse than the Jews. But as it happens, for example, when al-Qaeda wanted to blow up our embassies in East Africa, 1998, they didn't have the techniques at the time for massive truck bombs. So they reached out to Hezbollah and to Iran, and they got training in Iran and in Lebanon so that they could carry out those operations. What's happening now may lead them to be so angry at each other that those types of cooperation may not be possible, which might make them a little less dangerous in one way, but in many other ways more so. This is an ongoing threat. I think we've done a lot to make ourselves safer. We've done a lot to be able to understand the nature of the threat a lot better. But we can't sit back on our laurels and say, okay, we're done. This is something we're going to be dealing with for a while.
Imagining for a minute that things improve between us and Iran and some rapprochement happens, and Iran stops supporting Hezbollah as much. Is Hezbollah self-sustaining without Iran?
It's an excellent question, and the answer, simply put, is at face value, no. Without Iran, Hezbollah is yet another annoying, radical, extremist terrorist group that thinks it's okay to kill people to achieve its political goals. What makes Hezbollah so dangerous is that it has given tens of thousands of rockets, many, many, many thousands more rockets than most sovereign countries. There are a lot of rockets in Lebanon. The government of Lebanon has very, very few. Hezbollah's got about 60,000. What makes Hezbollah so dangerous is the intelligence training, the operations training, the logistical support that they get from Iran. And without that, they are nowhere near as capable as they otherwise are. Unfortunately, and I honestly, it wasn't meant to be a pithy statement. I would love for that scenario to occur, but I believe that there is zero chance that it will, because I believe that the nature of this Islamic Republic of Iran is one in which Hezbollah is central to its worldview, to its ability to extend its arm beyond its borders. That at various times of its existence, the idea of exporting the revolution has been more central or more immediate than other times, but at all times it was there. The idea of this Islamic revolution was never meant to stop at Iran's borders, and for one to say so would be heretical in the leadership of the country. At the end of the day, even if the new President Rouhani turns out to be moderate on domestic issues, which I think it probably will, and even if he ends up being somewhat moderate on some of the nuclear issues, which there's some discussion that maybe he will be, and perhaps the Supreme Leader is allowing him to be, I don't think that this is going to necessarily, and I think in fact it's very unlikely, it will have a trickle-down effect to Iran's support for terrorism. Not only because Iran's support for terrorism is so cost-effective, it costs very little financially, and it costs very, very little politically. Iran has engaged in directly and supported through proxies acts of terrorism throughout many, many, many years. And I challenge anyone to show me a single instance where there has been a serious repercussion. There has not yet been. I wrote a piece, a policy brief that's on the Washington Institute's website about kind of the precedent of what happens when Iran elects quote-unquote moderate presidents. And the two precedents, of course, are Rafsanjani and Khatami. And I just looked at some of the declassified CIA reports from the time when Rafsanjani came to power, when Khatami came to power. And what they're reporting at the time is that despite all of their public statements for moderation on things at home and abroad, it wasn't translating in the least into a tampering down of support for terrorism, quite the opposite. So while you had moderate presidents in power, you had Iran and Saudi Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah, targeting Khobar Towers, U.S. Air Force personnel who were in their beds at the time at the Khobar Towers barracks in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, U.S. soldiers who ironically were there to protect fellow Shia, Iraqi Shia, from Saddam Hussein at the time, but no tampering down. And what they conclude with is that on top of that, it's not just that it was clear that they didn't want to tamper down their support for terrorism, but that even if they did want to, this portfolio does not sit with the president. This portfolio sits with the supreme leader, and that they would not have the authority to do so on their own unless the supreme leader went along. I don't mean to, rain on the parade. I just think we need to go into this realistically.
Thank you for
Thank you very much.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.